The dust of the Texas Panhandle had a way of finding its way into every crevice of a man's soul. It clung to your clothes, your lungs, and the very memory of who you were before you came to this sun-scorched expanse. My name is Colton Hayes, and I was a man running from ghosts. The ghosts of a city that had chewed me up and spit me out. The ghost of a woman who had left me for a man with a shinier watch, and the ghost of a father who'd told me I'd never amount to anything. So I did what any self-respecting, broken man did. I got in my beat-up, rust-colored Ford pickup, threw a worn-out duffel bag in the back, and drove until the pavement ended and the gravel turned to dirt. I drove until the sky became a terrifying, beautiful, endless bowl of blue that made you feel both insignificant and brutally exposed. I was looking for a place to disappear, a place where the only thing that mattered was the next sunrise and the work it demanded. That's how I ended up at the Broken Spoke Ranch. I'd seen the sign from the main road, half torn and bleached by the sun, but it was the help wanted sign, scratched onto a piece of plywood and nailed to a fence post that made me turn. The gate was an old, heavy iron affair, and it groaned in protest as I pushed it open. The driveway stretched for a mile, a thin ribbon of caliche dust leading to a cluster of buildings that looked like they were holding a desperate meeting about whether to collapse or not. The main house was a sprawling, two-story Victorian relic painted a faded, peeling white. Its wraparound porch was cluttered with old farm equipment, empty crates, and a couple of rocking chairs that looked like they'd given up on life. The barn was in better shape, its red paint a little less faded, but the roof had definite sag to it. A handful of horses watched me from a paddock, their ears pricked forward with mild curiosity. A few chickens scratched in the dirt near a coop that was missing more than a few slats. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was deafening. No city hum, no sirens, just the buzzing of a million unseen insects and the distant, mournful cry of a cow. I was halfway to the porch when the screen door banged open. She stood there, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. She was tall for a woman, with a wiry, sun-bronzed strength that spoke of years of hard labor. Her face was angular, the cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, and her hair was the color of burnt sienna, pulled back into a no-nonsense braid that was coming undone. Her eyes were what struck me the most, as startling clear gray, like a stormy winter sky. They were assessing me, peeling back the layers of my worn-out jeans and faded shirt, and finding me wanting. "You lost, stranger." Her voice was a low, rich contralto, with a slight huskiness to it that suggested she wasn't used to asking politely. I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling like a kid caught stealing apples. "No, ma'am. Saw your sign. Heard you might be looking for a hand." She crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture that was purely defensive. "You a ranch hand?" I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. "I can do just about anything. I can ride. I can fix fences. I can mend a tractor." It was a lie. I'd been an advertising executive in Dallas. My idea of fixing a tractor was calling a mechanic, but I was a fast learner and desperate. She took a slow, deliberate step down onto the porch. "Ain't seen you around here before. Where you from?" "Dallas," I said, and the word felt like a dirty secret. A flicker of something amusement, disgust crossed her face. "A city boy, figures." She looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle. "You look like you've never worked a day in your life." "I'm a hard worker," I insisted. "Give me a chance. That's all I'm asking." She walked around me, a predator circling its prey. She wasn't wearing boots but soft, worn leather moccasins that made her steps silent. She picked up my hand and turned it over, looking at my callous-free palm. I felt a hot flush of shame. Soft hands, she murmured, almost to herself. Pale. You got a name, city boy. Colton Hayes. She dropped my hand like it was something unpleasant. Well, Colton Hayes, I don't know why you're here, and frankly, I don't care. I'm not running a charity for lost souls. She gestured with her chin toward the dilapidated house. As you can see, things are a little lean around here. I'm not asking for charity, I said, my voice hardening. I'm asking for a job. I'll work for room and board. That's all. She stopped her pacing and stood directly in front of me. She had to tilt her chin up to meet my eyes, but there was nothing submissive about her stance. She was a queen on her crumbling throne. Her gaze was unwavering. The air between us crackled. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the wind whispering through the dry grass. Then, she leaned in closer and her voice dropped to a whisper so soft it was almost stolen by the breeze. She said, I don't need a cowboy. I frowned, confused, but the sign. Her stormy gray eyes bore into mine. She cut me off, her words a mere breath, yet they felt like a shout in the vast silence. I need a husband. I blinked. I was sure I'd misheard her. The wind was howling in my ears. Maybe the sun had fried my brain. Excuse me. She didn't repeat herself. She just stood there, waiting for the shock to subside. And as I stared into those hardened, desperate eyes, I realized she wasn't joking. There was no hint of a smile on her lips, no glint of mischief in her gaze. This was a business proposition. I need a husband, she said again, her voice flat. To work the land, sure. But I don't need a hired hand who will take a paycheck and leave when things get tough. I need someone who's going to be here. At the end of the day, the bank doesn't care about a hard worker's sweat. They care about a signature on a deed. They care about a wife and a husband working the place together. They need to see a family name on the loan papers, not just a desperate woman's. Without a husband, I'm just another single woman the bank sees as a bad risk. The pieces started falling into place. The decrepit state of the ranch, the single woman running it alone. She was fighting a losing battle, and the enemy wasn't just the drought or the failing fences. It was the system. You want me to marry you? I said, the words tasting foreign and insane on my tongue. It's just paper, she said dismissively. We live separate lives. You work the land. You get a roof over your head and 3 square meals a day. I get the respectability I need to convince the bank to give me another extension. In a year, maybe 2, when the ranch is back on its feet and I don't need their goddamn permission, we get a quiet divorce. You go back to Dallas, or wherever you're running from. We both get what we want. It was the most insane, brilliant, and desperate plan I'd ever heard. It was also my only way out. I had $112 to my name, a gas tank on empty, and a past I was desperate to outrun. This ranch, this odd, harsh woman, was offering me a life raft. You're not even going to ask me if I have a criminal record, I said. A weak attempt at a joke. Don't care, she said flatly. What you were doesn't matter. What you are now, and what you'll do to help me save this place, that's all that counts. She extended a hand. It was calloused and strong, with dirt under the fingernails. And Eliza Brooks. You got a deal, Colton Hayes? I looked at her hand. It was the hand of someone who had fought and clawed and cried to hold on to this tiny patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere. She had the audacity to believe she could save it. I didn't even have the audacity to believe I could save myself. I took it. Her grip was firm, and it wasn't a shake, it was a sealing of a pact. Deal. That was the beginning. It was, I would soon learn, a beginning that was more complicated than I could have ever imagined. The first week was a brutal education. My first day, Eliza just pointed me toward a pile of rusty T-posts and a post hole digger. "The south fence line is down," she said. "Fix it." For 6 hours, under the scorching Texas sun, I wrestled with the impenetrable rocky soil. My soft, city hands blistered, then bled. My back screamed in protest. By the time I'd gotten a single post in the ground, she strode over on her horse, a beautiful, coal-black mare named Shadow. She dismounted and inspected my work, her face an unreadable mask. She kicked the post with the toe of her boot. It didn't budge. A flicker of what might have been approval crossed her face. Well, I'll be damned. Maybe a city boy can learn. That was the closest I got to praise for weeks. The routine was brutal and unrelenting. I woke up before the sun, my muscles aching, and she had a pot of scorching black coffee and a plate of simple but hearty food waiting. Then it was work until the sun was a blazing ball of fire directly overhead, a short, silent lunch, and then more work until the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet. We worked in silence mostly. She told me what to do, and I did it. Sometimes she would give me a grudging nod, or a curt good enough, and I'd feel a surprising surge of pride. The house, as promised, was separate. I lived in a small, dusty room off the bunkhouse, which was a little more than a shed with a cot and a rickety table. Eliza lived in the big house, but I was a permanent fixture in her kitchen. The wife-slash-husband charade didn't begin immediately. "First, let's see if you can get through a month without quitting," she had said. "Then we'll talk about the paperwork." She was suspicious of me, and I couldn't blame her. My early attempts at conversation were clumsy. "So, how long has your family owned this land?" I asked one evening, my tongue loosened by exhaustion. She looked at me, her gray eyes unreadable. "Long enough." "Where are your folks?" I pressed, leaning against the door frame, wincing as I bent my blistered fingers. "Ed," she said, her voice clipped, "passed on a few years back. It's just me and the ghost of this place now." I could see the grief that flickered behind her eyes, quickly masked. I understood that better than most. This place wasn't just a ranch to her. It was a memory, a legacy, a promise. It was the only thing she had left. After that, I stopped prying. We got married in the living room of the Broken Spoke, 3 weeks to the day after I'd arrived. It was a simple ceremony presided over by a weary-looking judge who drove out from the county seat. There were no flowers, no guests, no cake, just the two of us, standing awkwardly in the dusty, cluttered room. We didn't kiss. We barely looked at each other. The judge pronounced us man and wife, and we signed the papers. It was the most transactional wedding in the history of Texas. Eliza's demeanor didn't change one bit. That night, she cooked a special dinner, a thick, juicy steak from a steer she butchered herself. As we ate in the oppressive silence of the kitchen, she was all business. "The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, is coming by next week for a walkthrough of the property," she said, not bothering to make eye contact. "He'll want to see the improvements. You need to look the part. You're no longer a drifter. You're my husband. Got it?" "Got it," I said. "And one more thing," she added, her voice suddenly strained. "He's got a thing for me. He's made it clear that my single status was the only thing holding him back from foreclosing. He figured a woman alone couldn't make it. So, Colton, I need you to be convincing. The man is a hawk. He'll be looking for cracks. If he sees a hint of this being a sham, he'll use it to tear this place apart." I nodded. "I can do that." Her brow furrowed. "Are you sure? I need to know you're in this for the long haul. I don't need you freezing up when he asks about our honeymoon or where you proposed." I looked at her, at the anxiety she was trying so hard to hide. For the first time, I saw not just the hardened rancher, but the vulnerable woman beneath. She was terrified of losing everything. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Protectiveness. "I'm a good actor, Eliza," I said softly. "Just tell me what to say." The plan worked. When Mr. Henderson arrived, he was a portly man with a sweaty brow and a smug, condescending air. He strode around the property like he owned the place, pointing out every flaw, every weed, every loose board. "Mrs. Brooks, Hayes," he corrected himself, his eyes lingering on Eliza in a way that made my blood boil. "It's good to see you've finally come to your senses and gotten a partner." I stepped forward, placing a hand possessively on Eliza's lower back. I felt her stiffen, but she didn't pull away. "She's my wife," I said, my voice firm. "And we're going to turn this place around. Just need a little more time and a little more rope." Henderson eyed me skeptically. "And where did you come from, Mr. Hayes?" She never mentioned a bow. "Met at a rodeo in San Antonio." I lied smoothly. Eliza was the prettiest thing on two legs. It was love at first sight. I squeezed her shoulder gently, playing my part. Eliza, to her credit, played along beautifully. She leaned into me, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "He's quite the charmer." Kept me waiting for a while, though. Henderson wasn't convinced. "A city feller like yourself know anything about ranching? This is a big responsibility." "I'm learning," I said, meeting his gaze. "I've got two good hands and I'm not afraid of hard work. Eliza tells me what to do, and I do it. That's all a man needs to know." Henderson grunted. He did the walkthrough, pointed out the peeling paint and the drooping fence line, and then left. He didn't foreclose. The extension was granted. That night, Eliza cooked another special meal. She was quiet, but there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. After we finished, she poured us both a glass of whiskey. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was nothing," I said, taking a sip. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn. She shook her head. "No, it wasn't nothing. That man would have taken everything from me. He thought I was weak." For a moment there she trailed off, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "You made me feel like I wasn't alone." I shrugged, the sudden intimacy making me uncomfortable. "That was the deal, remember?" "I remember," she said. But there was a new softness in her gaze. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to pull it off. You were convincing." The moment hung in the air, delicate and charged. It was the first time we had been anything other than a foreman and a hireling. I felt an urge to reach out to her, to bridge the impossible gap that existed between us. But I didn't. It wasn't part of the deal. I was just a drifter who had signed on for a year. The weeks turned into months, and the broken spoke began its slow, agonizing resurrection. I fixed every fence on the property. I learned to ride, really ride, learning the subtle language of the horse. I helped Eliza birth a calf, my hands slick with blood and fluid, and I felt a strange, primal sense of accomplishment. We rebuilt the chicken coop and painted it a cheerful white. We patched the roof of the barn, slowly. The pride of ownership began to replace the fear of failure. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, the act began to feel like a reality. It was the little things. The way she would save the last cup of strong, black coffee for me. The way I'd find my favorite shirt mended and washed. The way our bickering, which had once been cold and formal, turned into something almost playful. "Or putting the post in crooked, city boy," she'd say. "I'm putting it in the way you taught me, boss lady." I'd retort, "Well, that's a terrible teacher you have then." We'd both crack a smile. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch steps staring out at the sunset. The sky was a glorious, bruised palette of purple and orange, and she looked utterly exhausted. "Rough day?" I asked, sitting down on the step beside her. She sighed, hugging her knees to her chest. "The bullocks got out again. I spent 2 hours chasing them down." I chuckled. "You should have just whistled for them. They're like puppies." She shot me a tired look. "Don't get smart." But there was no heat in her voice. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The cicadas started their nightly chorus. In the distance, a coyote yipped. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a long while. "Sure." "Why are you really here, Colton?" she asked, turning to look at me. Her gray eyes were serious, probing. "What are you running from?" I took a deep breath. It was the first time she'd asked. I could have deflected, given her another lie, but for some reason, I didn't want to. I was tired of the lies. "I had a different life," I said slowly. "In Dallas, I made a lot of money. I had a big apartment, a fancy car, a beautiful girlfriend. I was at the top of my game. I thought I had it all." "But," she prompted gently. I let out a bitter laugh. "But I was a fake. I sold dreams to people who didn't need them. I was good at it. Too good. I convinced everyone around me that I was a successful, brilliant man, but I was just a kid who was terrified of failure. My girlfriend, she saw through it. She left me for a guy who was even more successful than me. My father, he never believed in me. He always said I'd never amount to anything. And when it all fell apart, I realized he was right. So I ran. I ran all the way out here." She was quiet for a moment, processing my confession. I felt exposed, raw. I waited for her to judge me, to scoff at my self-pity. Instead, she said, "Your father was wrong." I looked at her, surprised. "He was wrong," she repeated, her voice firm. "You're not a failure. Look at what you've done here. You fixed the fences. You learned to ride. You saved this place. A failure doesn't do that. A failure gives up. You didn't." Her words hit me harder than I expected. A lump formed in my throat. "Thanks," I managed to croak. She gave me a small smile. "You don't have to thank me. It's the truth." She looked back out at the sunset. "We're all running from something, Colton. And running from the fear of losing this place. You're running from the fear of being a failure. Maybe we can help each other stop running." I didn't know how to respond to that. The air between us felt different. More intimate. The crickets sang, and the last rays of the sun painted her profile in gold. Then, she did something unexpected. She leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, a moment of complete trust. I could feel the warmth of her body, the faint scent of hay and soap. I didn't dare move. I just sat there as the stars began to emerge, feeling for the first time in a very long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was a small step, but it was a step over the line we had drawn. The line between a business arrangement and something more. The drought came that summer. It was a cruel, relentless feast that ached the earth until it cracked. Every creek bed went dry. Then grass turned to brown, brittle straw. We had to buy hay, and the cost was astronomical. The savings Eliza had been hoarding for years was evaporating before our eyes. The bank sent another threatening letter. The pressure was immense. Eliza withdrew into herself, a mood as bleak and dry as the landscape. She snapped at me over the smallest things. I knew she was terrified. This was what it all came down to. All the work, all the lies, all the desperate hope. It was all for nothing if the rain didn't come. One night, I found her in the barn, sobbing. It was a raw, heart-wrenching sound, muffled by her hands. She was sitting on a bale of hay, her body racked with grief. I didn't say anything. I just walked over, sat down beside her, and pulled her into my arms. She faltered for a second, and then she collapsed against me, burying her face in my chest. She cried for her parents, for the ranch, for the years of struggle. She cried for the unfairness of it all. I just held her, choking her back, murmuring soothing words into her hair. I felt her tears soak through my shirt. I felt the tremors in her body. And in that moment, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would burn this world to the ground to save her from her pain. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, though I had no right to make that promise. "No, it's not," she choked out. "We can't fight the sky. We're going to lose everything." "No, we're not," I said, a new resolve hardening inside me. "We'll figure it out. We always do." I wasn't just a drifter anymore. I wasn't just a husband on paper. In that barn, holding her in the flickering lamplight, I was her partner. I was her husband, in every way that mattered. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. I loved her. The truth hit me like a freight train. I loved this stubborn, fierce, impossibly strong woman. I loved her for her vulnerability and her strength. I loved her for the way she fought for her legacy. I loved her for the way she had seen a broken man and given him a purpose. The love was real, but I was still a liar. Our entire marriage was built on a lie, and I had to tell her the truth. It was the only way I could be the man she deserved. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked exhausted, but she had the kettle on. Life on a ranch didn't stop for tears. "Eliza," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, "we need to talk." She glanced at me, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "What about?" "About this. About us." She set down the kettle, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't think I can handle another bad news right now, Colton." "It's not bad news," I said. "Well, it is. It's a confession." She stiffened, her back straightening. She braced herself, as if for a blow. I took a deep breath. "The deal we made, the marriage. I have to tell you that it's not just a deal to me anymore." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" I stepped closer to her. "When we got married, it was a business arrangement, a way to save your ranch, and I played my part. I tried to keep my distance, but somewhere along the way, I stopped acting." Her stormy gray eyes searched mine. "Colton." "I love you, Eliza," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it's insane. I know we started this as a lie, but it's not a lie to me anymore. I don't want a divorce in a year. I want to be your husband, for real." She stared at me, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. The silence stretched, agonizingly long. "Say something," I pleaded. She shook her head slowly, taking a step back. "You love me. More than anything." She let out a shaky breath, and then, to my utter astonishment, a smile broke across her face. It was the first real, full, unguarded smile I had ever seen on her. It transformed her, making her breathtakingly beautiful. "You're an idiot," she whispered, but her eyes were shining. "Excuse me." "You're a city boy idiot," she repeated, stepping into my space. "You come here, you don't know the first thing about fawning. You marry a stranger for a deal, and then you fall in love with her." "Well, when you put it that way," I began, but she cut me off. She grabbed the front of my dusty shirt, pulled me down, and kissed me. It was a fierce, demanding, desperate kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of coffee, and tears, and a million unsaid things. It was a kiss that answered every question I had, and raised 1,000 more. It was the kiss of a woman who had been fighting alone for too long and had finally found her partner. When we broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. She rested her forehead against mine. "I love you too, Colton Hayes," she murmured. "I think I've loved you since you fixed that first fence post." I laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Told you I was a hard worker." She swatted my chest. "You're still an idiot." That was 3 years ago. The drought finally broke that autumn with a series of rainstorms that turned the dry creeks into gushing rivers. The ranch survived. Eliza and I, with the help of a few hard-working hands, turned the broken spoke into a thriving operation. We diversified, adding a small herd of goats and a flock of sheep. We built a website, selling our grass-fed beef directly to customers. It was still a tough life, but it was our life. We had a daughter, a fiery little thing with her mother's gray eyes and my stubborn chin. We named her Hope. She was the living embodiment of everything we had fought for. And me, I wasn't a failure anymore. I was a husband, a father, and a rancher. I was a man who had found a place to belong. The other day, I was fixing a fence along the south property line. The sun was warm on my back. The sky was a brilliant blue, and I could hear Hope laughing as she chased a butterfly with her mother in the distance. My hands were no longer soft. They were calloused, tanned, and crisscrossed with 1,000 tiny scars, a roadmap of my new life. I thought back to that first day, to the dusty, desperate woman on the porch who had looked at my soft hands with such contempt. I thought about her whisper, the one that had changed my entire life. I thought about how she had said, "I don't need a cowboy. I need a husband." She didn't need a cowboy to rope a steer or brand a calf. She needed a husband to build a life with. She needed a partner, a support system, someone to fight beside her. And I had been the idiot lucky enough to answer her call. I didn't just save the broken spoke. Eliza saved me. She gave me purpose, and in the process, I found the one thing I never knew I was looking for. The home.